Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you know, it is illuminating to hear such voices in this House, because I'm afraid the harsh reality is that many business organisations, many industry organisations in Scotland see the impact, and not just in Scotland, throughout the UK. The British Chamber of Commerce, the National Farmers Union, the Food and Beverage Association, the Timber Trade Federation have all talked about the negative impact of this deal, but you never get the truth from the Scottish Conservatives. Mr. Speaker, no, I'm going to make progress because I'm aware that other colleagues wish to speak.
Well done, Ian.
Mr. Speaker, it didn't have to be like this. If the Prime Minister had any interest in the people of Scotland, he would have engaged with our Scottish Government.
Yep.
From the very beginning, the Scottish Government sought to compromise. We did this by offering up Scotland's place in Europe, a compromise position for all of the United Kingdom and for Scotland to remain in the single market and the customs union. And you know, I have to tell you that we had no engagement with the UK Government over these papers. But I can say this to you, when I went to see Michel Barnier, he had read every page of that document. That's the difference between the attitude of our friends and colleagues in Europe and the disdain that our Scottish Government gets from Westminster. Our plan was dismissed out of hand and then followed by years of the UK Government ignoring Scotland, ignoring our Parliament. Mr. Speaker, with Northern Ireland getting access to the single market and the customs union, it is clear that the Prime Minister is willing to put trust in the people of Northern Ireland to manage its relationship. So it's inexplicable that he won't trust the people of Scotland, who also voted overwhelmingly to remain in the European Union.
Absolutely.
This offer gives Northern Ireland a competitive advantage over Scotland. And whilst we respect and understand the unique circumstances of Northern Ireland, I want to be clear. Everyone in the SNP wants to see the continuation of peace and stability. But the proposal in this deal is, in effect, being kept in the single market and the customs union as a consequence. That was our compromise position, and the UK Government completely ignored us, ignored Scotland. The Prime Minister has shown the people of Scotland total contempt. A Prime Minister who has no mandate from Scotland, yet he seeks to impose his Brexit against our democratically expressed will, silences the wishes of our people and weakening our economy. This Prime Minister and his Brexit fan club in number 10 don't care about Scotland. They're obsessed with only one thing: winning and delivering their Brexit fantasy at any cost. Mr. Speaker, the dishonesty and lies of the... Well, you know, I hear the ministers shouting from the front bench. Not true. Where was the engagement with the Scottish Government of our place in Europe? It simply didn't happen. It was absolutely, completely true. He can shake his head because he doesn't like the reality. Mr. Speaker, the dishonesty and the lies of Vote Leave brought the country to vote for Brexit in the first place. And this should be something...
Order, resume your seat. As far as I'm aware, the Right Honourable Gentleman is not currently giving way. And so the order! And so the Chancellor actually shouldn't stand there portentously, as though he has an absolute right to intervene. It might be courteous to allow him to do so, but such an allowance has not yet been made. Mr. Ian Blackford.
I'm afraid today, Mr. Speaker, this House will be listening to our voices, and perhaps the Right Honourable Gentleman might catch your eye later on. Mr. Speaker, the dishonesty and lies of Vote Leave brought this country to vote for Brexit in the first place. And this would be something that the Prime Minister and many in his cabinet should be ashamed of. They have torn their country, their parliament, their own party apart. Mr. Speaker, this is the beginning of the end of their precious union. And their stated Etonian vision for society. Scotland will not be ignored anymore. The deal must be stopped and binned today. Whether this deal passes today or not, the government needs an extension. This deal is devastating for Scotland. We will not vote for it, and we call for the extension period to be used for an election so that we can get rid of this rotten Tory government out of Downing Street. The Scottish National Party are here to do our job, to stand stronger for Scotland. Those across this House who ever want to lay claim to representing the voices and the interests of the people of Scotland, you cannot support this deal. You cannot inflict economic and social harm on our society. Myth after myth from the Prime Minister and his cronies, but the facts are clear. The European Union accounts for 56% of the UK's exports and 65% of imports, either through the EU directly or through other countries where the EU has trade arrangements with. The direct value of EU trade is over triple the value of US trade. The Brexit Secretary even said that the EU was the UK's most important partner. 100,000 jobs in Scotland at risk. Our fishermen, farmer and crofters, all disadvantaged by this deal. As the Scottish Seafood Association put it, this could switch the lights out for a small exporter. 5 separate certificates all have to be done on October 31st. For a small exporter, that is possibly trying to sell 30 kilos of top quality langoustines to a restaurant in Paris. Switch the lights off. The restaurant owner is going to go and buy his lovely langoustines somewhere else. Not my words, that's from the Scottish Seafood Association. And I hope, Mr Speaker, that people in Scotland can see the government front bench are laughing. People's livelihoods are at risk, and the government front bench thinks it's funny. You should be utterly, utterly ashamed of yourselves. Mr Speaker, the Scottish National Party will not stand by and let this government rip our economy and our country's future apart. We are Europeans, and Scotland is a European nation. Members across this House should unite with the SNP and bring this government down. A general election is the best way now to stop this Prime Minister and stop this dangerous Brexit. Mr Speaker, let me say this. Anyone, any single member here this afternoon who backs the Tory Prime Minister and his cheating Vote Leave campaign by shafting Scotland will never, not ever be forgiven by the people of Scotland. Overnight, we've seen the reports, the rumours and the whispers. Mr Speaker, is the Labour Party really going to allow their members of Parliament to vote for this catastrophic Brexit deal? Let me remind the Labour Party what the TUC said. This deal would be a disaster for working people. It would hammer the economy, cost jobs and sell workers' rights down the river. The Prime Minister has negotiated even a worse deal than Theresa May. All MPs should vote against it. That's the words of the TUC. So let me ask, why has the Leader of the Opposition not yet guaranteed that all Labour MPs will vote with the Scottish National Party this afternoon against this deal? A deal that would be devastating for Scotland, ripping us out of the EU against our will, terminating our freedom of movement rights, threatening jobs, living standards, our public services and the economy. Is the Leader of the Labour Party really willing to allow any members of his party to write a blank cheque for this Tory Prime Minister to deliver Brexit? Not a single member of the Labour Party should be voting for a deal that delivers a race to the bottom on workers' rights, on environmental standards, and paves the way for dismantling our precious NHS. It would be absolutely staggering that with a no-deal threat on the table, any Labour MP could even think about voting for this toxic deal. Mr Speaker, Labour must not be the handmaidens of a Tory Brexit. which we know will cost thousands of jobs and harm people's livelihoods. So I appeal to every member of I give
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. I wondered if he got a section of his speech from John Landsman. So could I ask the right honourable gentleman, does he agree with me that when it comes to workers' rights, the EU isn't God? The fact is, local authorities up and down the UK have to outsource contracts to the European Union at the detriment of workers in their local communities. We have seen a rise in zero-hour contracts and poor conditions, partly because of that outsourcing. Does he agree with me?
I thank the right honourable lady. We were colleagues together in committee. I'm fond of her, as she knows.
To the right honourable gentleman to face the House so we can all hear. Mr Ian Blackford.
I simply say to my right honourable friend that I would trust the European Union with workers' rights before I would trust the opposition must stop the excuses and finally act by backing the SNP tonight to reject this damaging deal, secure an extension and call an election so we can bring this Tory government down and stop Brexit. But Mr Speaker, meanwhile, Scottish Tory MPs are prepared to vote for a deal that they previously pledged that they would not back. Simple irresponsibility and moral cowardice. I say to the Scottish Tories, you are serving the death knell on the Union by voting for this deal. Independence is coming, and we will take our place as a proud European nation. What a shift in time, Mr Speaker, from what Ruth Davidson said in 2014. No means we stay in. We are members of the European Union. Mr Speaker, the people of Scotland now know, more than ever, you can never, not ever, trust a Tory. We already know that despite the promise after promise...
We wish to expedite the debate, and the right honourable gentleman must be heard as I think he's approaching his peroration. Mr Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and perhaps if they settle down we can get through this and their voices might be heard. We already know that despite promise after promise made by the Scottish Tories to protect our fishermen, that the backstop loophole in the deal threatens to be potentially devastating for the Scottish fishing sector. Under the proposed deal, it might actually help if you listen rather than trying to shout from a position at the bar. Because this is about the livelihood of fishermen that they falsely claim to protect, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, under the proposed deal, Scottish fish exports to the European Union face being hit by damaging tariffs. Any move which could see Scottish vessels register in Northern Ireland to land their catch there and then have it moved to the Republic for processing to escape those duties would pose a huge danger to Scotland's fishing ports and our widening processing industry. That's the reality of what the Tories are threatening to do to our fishing industry. It would directly threaten thousands of jobs and could make the sector among the most hardest hit by Brexit in the whole of Scotland. Scottish fishing sold out by the Conservatives yet again. That is the stark reality. Opposed to the bluster of a UK Tory government which once again treats Scotland as an afterthought. Well, Mr Speaker, we in the SNP, we will not stand for it. I warn members who marched through the lobbies with the government this afternoon that selling Scotland out by backing this deal will be the final nail in the coffin for the Union. Mr Speaker, while the UK drags Scotland out of the EU against our will, while this Tory government downgrades our devolution settlement and destroys our rights, in Scotland the SNP are looking proudly at our record. We are ambitious for our nation. And not this Prime Minister, not the Leader of the Opposition, not any Leader of the Liberal Democrats, not anyone will stand in our way. The Scottish people are sovereign, and they should have the choice to determine their own future. Mr. Speaker, this year, Scotland is marking the 20th anniversary of devolution, the establishment of our Scottish Parliament. The first speech that was made in the new Scottish Parliament in May 1999 was by my good friend Winifred Ewing. At the time she made that speech, she was also, of course, the mother of the European Parliament, having served there since 1979. Winnie expressed the hope that the Scottish Parliament would try to follow the more consensual style of the European Parliament and other European parliaments, rather than the more confrontational approach that we witnessed again here today in Westminster. And in our actions now, our actions today, we are trying to stay true to that advice. While there remains uncertainty over whether this proposed deal will pass, what is absolutely clear is it would take us out of the European Union, out of the single market, out of the customs union, against the overwhelming democratic will of the people of Scotland. Mr. Speaker, Scotland did not vote for Brexit in any form. And unlike others, the SNP will not vote for Brexit in any form. Scotland has been shafted, sidelined, silenced, ignored by this UB government, and it cannot be ignored today. Members, I urge you, do not stand by and allow this Prime Minister to drag us into an economic abyss. Because I warn the House, it is clearer than ever that the best future for Scotland is one as an equal, independent European nation. That is a choice that the SNP is determined to ensure is given to the people of Scotland. And those who vote against Scotland's interests this afternoon will be aware you are ending the Union. Scotland is not for leaving Europe. We will become an independent nation. My message to Europe is leave a light on for Scotland.